if your nightmares were real and followed you into waking life? Tonight, listen to 10 terrifying accounts of sleep paralysis from around the world. Moments where victims awoke unable to move, their breath frozen, their minds trapped, while something watched. And believe me, I've experienced sleep paralysis. It happens. So, light a candle, press play, and prepare for the darkest sleep you've ever had. My ordeal with the Kanashibari began after a falling out with a classmate. In Japan, Kanashibari is our word for sleep paralysis. It literally means being bound by invisible chains. Some say it can be caused by a curse, a vengeful spirit sent by someone who wishes you harm. I used to dismiss that as superstition, but I can't dismiss what happened to me. I was a second-year high school student in Kyoto. One afternoon, I got into a heated argument with a girl in my class, Aiko. She was quiet and odd, rumoured to dabble in the occult. In anger, I said some cruel things to her. I'll never forget the way she looked at me. Her eyes burned with hatred. As she walked away, I thought I heard her mutter a single phrase under her breath. Something like Osuwari, which means sit. I shrugged it off. That night, I went to bed feeling uneasy but exhausted. Sometime past 3 a.m., I awoke in total darkness to the sensation of pins and needles all over my body. I realized with mounting terror that I couldn't move at all. It was as if unseen metal bands were strapped across my limbs and chest. Even my jaw was locked. Only my eyes could dart about. I instantly recognized the condition. Kanashibari, the dreaded state I'd only heard about in ghost stories. I lay there, heart hammering my chest, trying to make sense of a dim shape looming above me. A pale outline of a person was standing right beside my bed. It was a woman, but not anyone I recognized. She wore a white funeral kimono, and her long black hair hung down, covering her face. A shiver of absolute dread coursed through me. I wanted to scream, but my throat was paralyzed. The spectral woman slowly bent over me, her hair brushing my cheeks. Through the strands, I glimpsed her face, ghastly pale, eyes sunken and blackened, as if she had crawled out of a grave. Her lips were stretched in a grin far too wide to be human. She began to whisper something into my ear. The voice was not Aiko's, nor any living person's. It was dry, papery, and filled with malice. Though I could barely comprehend the words, it sounded like an ancient chant or curse. With each whispered syllable, the pressure holding me down intensified. It felt like ropes tightening around my chest. My lungs strained. I could only draw the shallowest of breaths. I was convinced I was about to die, suffocated by this vengeful spirit. The ghostly woman pressed one icy hand against my forehead, as if pinning me like a butterfly to a board. My mind raced frantically. Was this Aiko's doing? Had she truly sicked a spirit on me? Tears rolled down my frozen face. Summoning every ounce of will, I mentally recited a Buddhist prayer my grandmother taught me for protection. Inside, I was screaming at the apparition, "Go away! Go away!" I begged forgiveness for whatever offence I had given. pale woman's head cocked suddenly, as if hearing something from far away. She stopped whispering. For a moment she was motionless, inches from my face. I could feel an unnatural cold radiating from her form. Then, without warning, she let out a spine-chilling giggle, the sound of a madwoman. In that instant, my bedroom door rattled. My mother in the next room had heard my muffled whimpering and came to check on me. "Daijoubu?" she called through the door. "Are you okay?" The door was locked, but the jolt of her trying the knob broke the silence. At the sound of my mother's voice, the pressure holding me disappeared as abruptly as it had come. I gasped and bolted upright, nearly vomiting from panic. There was no sign of the spectre, only the lingering chill in the air, and my own trembling body proved that something terrible had been there. I fumbled to let my mother in. She found me drenched in sweat and sobbing uncontrollably. It took me days to even speak of what happened. When I finally did, my grandmother solemnly declared that I had been hagged by an unreal, vengeful ghost. Perhaps someone with a grudge had sent it after me, she had said pointedly. I knew who came to mind. I never crossed Aiko again. We eventually made amends in a shaky peace, though I never dared ask if she had anything to do with that night. Skeptics say stress or guilt caused my paralysis, but I'll tell you this. The sensation of those cold hands and that horrible whisper felt utterly real. Whether it was truly a curse or a well-timed nightmare, I cannot say. All I know is that I was bound that night by something beyond the ordinary, and I've never slept the same since. In Egypt, many believe that when you wake up paralyzed with terror, you've been attacked by a Jinn, a malevolent spirit of smokeless flame. I never put much stock in those tales, but one sweltering night in Cairo, I learned why my grandmother always kept a Quran by her bedside. I had fallen asleep on my back, the old ceiling fan chopping the air above me. Sometime after 2 a.m, I jerked awake into a living nightmare. I couldn't move at all, not even a finger. The room was dimly lit by the street lamp glow through the window. As my eyes darted around in panic, I noticed a shape standing in the corner of my bedroom. At first, it looked like a simple shadow cast by furniture. Then, it moved. A tall, spindly figure peeled away from the darkness and glided closer to my bed. I wanted to scream, but my voice was locked in my throat. The figure was entirely black, not a person, but a silhouette of thick, roiling smoke in the vague outline of a man. Where its eyes should be, there glowed 2 pinpoints of dull orange light. A wave of sheer dread washed over me. In my mind I knew this was a Jinn, one of the evil ones I'd been warned about in bedtime stories. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. I could see my breath puffing in the cold air, and yet I was sweating. The smoky figure drifted to the foot of my bed. It began to whisper in Arabic. I heard my name slithering from its shapeless lips, along with other words I couldn't make out. The voice was dry and hollow, like wind blowing through an empty tomb. The Jinn's misty form then lunged. In an instant, it was on my chest, straddling me, It had no solid features, but I felt an immense weight bearing down, as if a mountain had settled atop my ribcage. I couldn't breathe. The room spun as I gasped silently. Its hands, dark, smoky tendrils, wrapped around my neck. Though it had no face, I sensed it watching me, enjoying my terror. My chest burned as I struggled in vain to break free from the invisible bindings holding me down. I remembered my Teta's advice. If a Jinn ever comes, recite Ayat al-Kursi. It's a verse from the Quran meant to ward off evil. In my head, I began frantically praying the verse, Allahu la ilaha illa huwal hayyul qayyum. Over and over I recited it internally, focusing all my panicked energy on the holy words. The Jinn hissed, seemingly agitated. Its grip on my throat did not tighten further, as if something was holding it back. Emboldened, I forced the words to form in my mind with greater clarity, pleading for God's protection. Suddenly, a piercing crack sounded from the corner of the room. A loud pop, like an electrical discharge. The smoky entity recoiled. In a blink, it released me and reared backward, its amorphous shape jittering at the edges. I caught a glimpse of those ember eyes flaring brighter, as if in anger or pain. Then, with a final guttural whisper, a sound that resonated in my skull, the Jinn vanished. It was as though a black veil had been lifted. One moment it was there, the next it dissolved into the darkness. I sat up violently, coughing and drawing deep gulps of air. Every inch of me was trembling. My throat felt ice cold and bruised. I fumbled for the light and began sobbing with relief when the warm glow filled the space. The nightmare was over. The next morning, I spoke to the local imam about what happened. He believed me without question. Al-Jatum, he said knowingly, the thing that sits. He explained that many in our community have had similar experiences and attribute them to Jinn attacks. Some even find bruises on their necks or scratches on their body after these encounters. I had finger-shaped bruises on my own throat. To this day, I refuse to sleep without performing vudu, which is ablution, and reciting protective verses from the Quran. Skeptics say it's just sleep paralysis, but in Egypt we know the truth. There are unseen spirits that wander in the night. I'm certain a Jinn tried to choke the life out of me in my sleep, and, if not for the mercy of God, that dark presence might have succeeded. In Newfoundland, I grew up hearing whispers of the Old Hag, a sinister entity said to come pressing on your chest in the dark. I never believed those tales, chalking them up to superstition. That changed on a cold autumn night when I came face to face with the hag herself. It was past midnight, and I jolted awake in inky darkness. My eyes were open, but my body was completely paralyzed. A heavy weight pinned me to the mattress, as if someone unseen had straddled me while I slept. The old house was silent, apart from the rattling wind and the thunder of my heartbeat in my ears. By the faint glow of moonlight through the window, I spotted a shape at the foot of my bed. It was crouching low. My heart pounded erratically as the figure began to move. An impossibly old woman crawled onto the bed, her limbs bending at unnatural angles As she slithered closer, I saw her clearly, a withered, wrinkled face framed by stringy long hair. Her eyes were dark, sunken pits, and her grin revealed a few crooked, broken teeth. She was exactly as the legend described, a witch-like withered old woman with long hair made flesh. I tried to scream, tried to flail, but I couldn't do either. My body refused to obey. I was hag-ridden, pinned helplessly beneath this malignant presence. She inched up my body with excruciating slowness. The mattress sagged under her impossible weight. Each breath became a shallow rasp as the hag settled on my chest, heavier than her frail form should allow. Her face hovered inches above mine. I could see every crease in her sallow skin, every strand of her greasy hair dangling in my face. A rancid odour of damp earth and rot wafted from her rags, the stench of something old and decayed. The crone opened her mouth as if to speak, but only a wet, guttural hiss came out. A cold droplet of something, saliva or bile, fell from her lips onto my cheek. I wanted to retch, to scream, to do anything, but my body remained rigid. In that moment, I was certain I was about to die. A thin wheeze escaped my throat as she bore down, my ribcage blazing under an invisible pressure. My mind raced. In the blur of panic, an old remedy surfaced. If you ever get hagged, try to move a finger or a toe. With every ounce of will, I focused on my right index finger. At first it wouldn't budge. The hag's withered face twisted into a silent snarl, as if she sensed me resisting. I strained and prayed in my head for the nightmare to end, to be released from her paralyzing grip. Suddenly, I felt a jolt of control. My finger twitched, then my hand. In an instant, the hideous weight on top of me vanished into thin air. I lunged upright, gasping and sobbing, my chest heaving as air flooded back into my lungs. The grotesque old woman was gone. I fumbled for the lamp and flooded the room with light. There was no intruder, only my familiar bedroom, empty. The only evidence of my encounter was the lingering dread in my gut, the ache in my chest, and the sweat-drenched sheets. I sat awake with every light on until the first grey hint of dawn crept in, too terrified to close my eyes again. In Newfoundland, even those who scoff at ghosts whisper about the hag as a very real threat. Now I understood why. By morning I was pale, exhausted, and grateful to be alive. And I knew the old stories were true. Later, I would learn that neighbours, even skeptics, had their own tales of waking to a similar witch on their chest. I had joined the ranks of the hagged, and even though science calls it sleep paralysis, I'll never forget the leering face of that old witch, nor the helpless feeling as she crushed the breath from my lungs. Every night since, I've gone to bed fearing that the old hag might crawl out of the darkness to visit me once again. I still remember the night my husband Lang lost his battle with the Darb Song. We Hmong have a name for the dark spirit that attacks men in their sleep. Lang told me it was trying to kill him. I'd often wake to find him drenched in sweat, gasping and shaking after a nightmare whispering that a heavy creature had perched on his chest and tried to choke him. He described it as a shadowy demon crouching on him, bony hands squeezing his throat. In our culture, the Darb Tsog is said to sit on a sleeper's chest and suffocate them until they stop breathing. My husband believed this evil had followed us from our homeland. Years before, we escaped the war in Laos and came to America for safety. But in Minnesota, Lang's worst fears wasn't soldiers or guns. It was a thing that came at night. He was convinced we had offended our ancestors by fleeing and failing to perform the proper rituals. He said the spirits were angry and the Darb Tsog had been sent to punish him. I tried to comfort him, saying these were just nightmares born of trauma. We even consulted an elder shaman who performed rites to ward off evil. But deep down, I was afraid too. In the refugee camp, we'd heard whispers of healthy young men dying mysteriously in their sleep, one after another. Some of our friends said an evil spirit was killing them, and that one night it might come for our family as well. One bitter winter week, Lang's nightmares grew worse. He began fighting sleep, terrified that if he closed his eyes, the demon would crush his heart. I often woke to his screams. One night, I found him sitting up in bed, eyes wide with terror. He rasped, "It was here again," pressing on my chest. I couldn't breathe. I held him until his pounding heart finally calmed. My husband was a proud, strong man who had survived war, but I saw tears of pure fear in his eyes that night. The last night I saw him alive, I woke to the sound of his breathing, a harsh laboured wheeze so loud it tore me from sleep. In the faint glow of our bedroom lamp, I saw Lang lying on his back, chest heaving, as if an invisible weight pressed down on him. I shook him urgently, calling his name. He wouldn't wake. His eyes stayed shut, his face twisted in a grimace, and his lips were turning blue. I will never forget the awful gurgling noise as he struggled to inhale. I screamed for him to wake up, but it was as if something held him down. Then, all at once, his body fell frighteningly still. My husband died there in our bed, right next to me. I shook his shoulders and begged him to come back, but Lang was already gone. I howled his name into the darkness until neighbours rushed in. Later, even after an autopsy and countless tests, the doctors could find no reason why a healthy 30-year-old man like him simply never woke up. They had no explanation at all. The cause was pending, they said. American doctors eventually gave this nightmare a name: sudden unexplained nocturnal death syndrome. But that dry term means nothing to me. After his death, our elders performed a soul release ceremony to guide Lang's spirit and protect us from the night demon. But no ritual can erase the horror of what happened. I know what truly took my husband. The Darb Tsog came for him, just as he'd feared. In a span of a few years, dozens of other Hmong refugees have suffered the same fate. Husbands, brothers, and sons claimed by a night terror no science can fully explain. Our community still lives in fear of sleeping and never waking, haunted by a demon that followed us across the ocean. I sleep alone now, forever marked by the memory of Lang's final moments, and by the question of whether it was really just his heart that stopped, or something evil that stole it from him. In the late 1970s, a family who escaped the killing fields of Cambodia finally found refuge in America, or so they hoped. Their youngest child, a 12-year-old boy, soon began suffering hellish nightmares. He told his parents with utter conviction that if he fell asleep, the thing in his dreams would kill him. The boy wouldn't fully describe the terror that stalked him, only that the thing was getting closer each time. His parents were sympathetic, but skeptical. They themselves were tormented by traumatic dreams of the war they survived, but even they recognized that his fear was beyond ordinary nightmares. Night after night, the boy refused to sleep at all. Exhausted and wide-eyed, he insisted over and over, "If I sleep, it will get me." His parents grew frantic and tried everything to help him. They played gentle music, tried meditation, even consulted a doctor for tranquilizers. But the boy fought off sleep for days on end. Desperate to stay awake, he furtively rigged a way to brew coffee in his bedroom, hiding a small coffee pot in his closet to fuel his vigil. Though his father gave him prescribed sleeping pills, the boy only pretended to swallow them. Unbeknownst to his family, he spat the pills out and hid them under his bed, determined not to let the demon in his dreams take him. As the bout of insomnia stretched toward a week, the boy grew pale and paranoid, eyes ringed with dark circles. His parents begged him to sleep, assuring him it was just in his mind. He shook his head and whispered, "You don't understand. This is different. It's real." At last, sheer exhaustion won out. One evening, the boy collapsed on the living room couch and drifted into a deep slumber, the first sleep he'd had in nearly a week. His anxious parents exchanged hopeful glances. Finally, he was safe from his hysteria, they thought. Relieved, they carefully carried their son upstairs to his bedroom and gently tucked him into bed. The mother wiped away tears of relief as she watched him breathing peacefully. Both parents went to bed feeling that the nightmare, at least the waking one, was over. Sometime after midnight, blood-curdling screams shattered the silence. The parents woke with a jolt to the sound of their son's terrified shrieks and a sudden crash from his room. They sprinted down the hall, hearts pounding. Bursting into the bedroom, they found their boy thrashing on the bed, caught in the grip of an unseen terror. His arms flailed wildly, as if fighting something invisible. His eyes were still shut, but his face was contorted in pure fright, and he was screaming at something in the dark. Before they could reach him, the child gave a final spine-chilling shriek, and then fell abruptly still. They rushed to his side and shook him, calling his name. He wouldn't wake. The father flicked on the light, and the parents stared in disbelief. Their son lay tangled in the sheets, unmoving, eyes shut as if peacefully asleep. But his small chest was no longer rising. In that instant, a keening wail of horror rose in the parents' throats as they realized their son was dead. There was no wound, no evidence of what had happened. It was as if he had simply been scared to death. Paramedics found no injury or explanation. The boy was healthy and just died in the middle of a nightmare. An autopsy later revealed no heart attack, no underlying illness, nothing that could explain this sudden death. Only afterward did the parents uncover the desperate measures their son had taken. In his closet sat a Mr. Coffee machine, still full of hot, black brew from the night he finally collapsed. Tucked under his bed were all the sleeping pills they thought he had been taking, dozens of pills, untouched, hidden away in foil packets. To this day, the case remains a chilling enigma. Doctors simply labelled it a case of nightmare death, a bizarre manifestation of sudden unexplained nocturnal death. But to the grieving family, there is nothing unexplained about it. They believe an evil force followed them from war-torn Cambodia, a malevolent spirit that preyed on their son's dreams. The boy had foreseen his fate, and despite all his efforts, the nightmare caught up with him in the end. Growing up in Brazil, I often heard my grandmother warn about La Pisadeira, the footstep lady. In our region, people whispered about a bony old hag with long fingernails who waits on rooftops at night, then creeps in to trample the chests of those who sleep on a full stomach. I always laughed off these stories as folklore to scare kids from overeating. That was before I came face to face with Pisadeira herself. One humid summer night, after a big family dinner, I lay in bed feeling uncomfortably full. The bedroom window was open to the night breeze. I drifted into an uneasy sleep. Sometime past midnight, I woke abruptly. I couldn't move. It was as if my whole body was locked in place. Only my eyes could dart around, wild and panicked. I saw that my bedroom door, which I had closed, was now slightly ajar, swaying as if someone had just slipped through. From above, I heard a faint scraping sound on the clay roof tiles, like nails or claws dragging slowly. My heart hammered. I tried to call out for my brother in the next room, but I could barely manage a whimper. Suddenly, I sensed a presence skittering down from the ceiling. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a gaunt shape crawl into the room. It was an old woman, or what looked like one. She was hideously thin, with tangled grey hair and a rictus grin stretched across her wrinkled face. In the moonlight, I could see her eyes glinting with wicked glee. She had long, bony fingers that ended in claw-like nails, and she wore filthy, tattered garments that hung off her skeletal frame. A sour stench of mildew and rotten fruit wafted in with her, making me want to gag. I recognized the figure at once. Pisadeira. This witch-like crone from my grandmother's tales was now hunched at the foot of my bed, as real as the night. My mind shrieked in terror, but my body remained frozen. Pisadeira let out a low, raspy chuckle, as if savouring my fear. Then, with unnatural speed, she scuttled onto my bed. I felt the mattress dip under the weight of something that shouldn't weigh much at all. Inch by inch, she crept up onto my chest. I will never forget the sensation, like a cold, knobbly knee pressing onto my sternum, followed by immense pressure. Pisadeira squatted on my torso, pinning me down. Her weight was disproportionate to her emaciated body, as if a great burden had fallen on me. I could hardly breathe. Each shallow inhale dragged in the odour of her breath, which was hot and rancid. She leaned down so that her long stringy hair brushed my face. Her eyes were inches from mine. They were clouded white, like a corpse's, yet they locked onto me with predatory delight. She began to laugh, a horrible, wet cackle that made my blood run cold. Her bony fingers pranced over my chest, tapping playfully as if deciding where to push down hardest. Then those claw-like nails dug into my skin. I tried to scream in pain, but no sound came out. My chest felt like it was collapsing under her weight. Black spots danced in my vision as I struggled to get any air. I thought I was about to die. In desperation, I began to pray silently. It was all I could do. I'm not deeply religious, but in that moment, I begged for any divine help. Pisadeira's grin faltered. She hissed in a fury and pressed down even harder, making my ribs ache. Just when I felt on the verge of blacking out, a sudden noise came from outside. The neighbour's dog started barking frantically. The hag's pale eyes widened, distracted. She lifted her head and let out an annoyed shriek like a startled owl. With that, the spell was broken. I gasped and found I could move a fingertip, then my arms. Pisadeira recoiled as I twitched, her form flickering in the dim light. I mustered a ragged cry. In an instant, the crone scuttled backward off my bed and scurried out through the open door with impossible speed. By the time my brother burst into the room, she was gone, if she had ever truly been there. I sat up shaking and drenched in sweat, my chest heaving. There were red marks on my skin where her claws had pressed, already blooming into bruises. I babbled to my brother about what I saw, and to my surprise, he paled and nodded. Others in our town had spoken of the same nightmare, waking up paralysed with a cackling old woman crushing the breath out of them. I finally understood the truth behind the legend my grandmother told. That night, La Pisadeira came for me, just as she had crept onto the homes of countless Brazilians over generations. I never mocked the old stories again. Nowadays, I'm careful not to go to bed on a full stomach, and when I do overindulge, I catch myself glancing up at the roof, half expecting to see a wiry, clawed silhouette waiting hungrily for me to fall asleep. When I was a child in rural Catalonia, my abuela used to mutter about La Pasanta, a fearsome black beast that slips into homes at night. According to local legend, the Pasanta can take the form of a huge black dog or cat that sits on your chest while you're asleep, crushing your breath and giving you nightmares. I always thought it was just an old folk tale. That was before the night I learned how real the Pasanta could be. It happened one autumn at our family's masia, which is a farmhouse, which we had in the Pyrenees. I was a skinny 13-year-old, more afraid of stray wolves than ghosts. One chilly evening, after finishing my chores, I climbed into my rickety wooden bed. The house was draughty, and I remember bundling under a heavy wool blanket. My older brother and I shared a room, but that night I was alone. He had gone to town with my father. I drifted off to the sound of distant bells on our goats in the hills. Sometime deep in the night, I awoke in the dark with a jolt of panic. There was an oppressive weight on my chest, pinning me to the mattress. I couldn't move a single muscle. The air felt thick and hot, and a foul animal smell filled my nostrils, like a wet dog and sulphur. My first thought was that one of our farm dogs had somehow jumped on me. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw something far more terrifying. A massive, shadowy shape was crouched atop my chest. It was roughly the size of a large dog, but far heavier than any dog ought to be. The thing had the shape of an enormous black hound. I could discern a canine head, pointy ears, and a pair of eyes gleaming dimly in the darkness. Those eyes were a burnished red, like smouldering coals. I tried to scream, but only a strained croak came out. The creature's weight pressed down, making each breath a struggle. My ribs felt ready to crack. I realized in a sickening moment that this was La Pasanta from my grandfather's tales. The beast's throat emitted a low, rumbling growl that I felt vibrating through my bones. It inched its broad, dark snout toward my face. I could feel the heat of its breath and see the faint outline of bared fangs. Its fur wasn't like a normal dog's. It was matted and sparse, patches of oily hair revealing grey, scaly skin beneath. A growl rose into a rasping snarl as the creature settled more of its bulk onto me. The pressure on my chest grew unbearable. I wheezed, trying to draw air. My mind raced frantically. I remembered Abuela telling me that the Pasanta often steals its victim's breath, slowly savouring the fear it causes. Now I knew what he meant. The creature's eyes bored into mine. I felt a dizzying wave of dread. Convinced I was about to be devoured or smothered alive, I mustered all my strength and tried to thrash, to shove it off, but my body refused to cooperate. I could only lie there, paralysed, as this phantom dog from hell crushed me. Tears of terror blurred my vision. The Pasanta's muzzle was so close I could feel its drool drip onto my cheek, warm and real. It was not a dream. This thing was physically on me, pinning me down. In my mind, I begged every saint I knew to save me, though no words could escape my lips. The beast seemed to grin, lips curling back as if amused by my helplessness. Just as my chest burned for lack of air and my sight began to dim, the creature suddenly whipped its head around toward the doorway. Its eyes perked up, and it let out an angry snarl. At that exact moment, a faint sound cut through the night, the clatter of our old kitchen door banging open. My mother had just returned home early, and the noise startled the beast. In one fluid motion, the black dog-like figure leapt off my chest. I felt the weight lift instantly. I gasped and coughed, sucking in a lungful of precious air. Through teary eyes, I saw the dark form scuttle into the corner of the room and then vanish into the shadows entirely, as if it had never been there. My mother found me on the bed hyperventilating and sobbing. She later told me I was white as a sheet and kept whispering, "Pasanta, Pasanta," over and over. In the days that followed, bruises blossomed on my where the creature had pinned me. Abuelo nodded knowingly at my story. Many in our village had a similar tale of waking up to a heavy black animal crushing them in their sleep. For generations, we'd believed it was a punishment for some wrongdoing or simply a wicked spirit roaming the hills. I don't know why it chose me that night, but I know one thing. The placenta of legend is terrifyingly real. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake in the small hours, heart pounding, and scan the dark corners for a pair of burning red eyes and the silhouette of a huge black hound waiting to pounce. As an anthropology graduate student, I travelled to a rural village in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, to study local folklore. I had heard whispers about the Tokoloshe, a creature villagers blamed for nightmares. According to Zulu lore, the Tokoloshe is a dwarf-like evil spirit summoned by black magic to torment people in the night. Ever the skeptic, I assumed these were just stories to explain sleep paralysis. My first week in the village proved me very wrong. One of my hosts, an older woman named Nokutula, confided that she hadn't slept soundly in weeks. Every night, something attacked her in her hut, she said, a small wicked being that crept in under covers of darkness. She showed me how she'd placed bricks under the legs of her bed, a traditional precaution to lift the bed high and deter the Tokoloshe, who are said to be short. I nodded politely, but internally I was dubious. To ease her fear, I offered to sleep in the spare cot in her rondavel, which is a round hut. I wanted to observe and perhaps debunk whatever was happening. We turned in as the village fires burned low. The African night was alive with insects and distant animal calls. I recalled the full moonlight filtering through the small high window of the hut as I drifted off. Sometime after midnight, I snapped awake with a start. I couldn't move. I was lying on my back on the cot, completely paralyzed. My immediate thought was that I must be experiencing sleep paralysis, an academic curiosity for me until that moment. But any intellectual thoughts fled when I sensed a presence in the room. Nokutula was asleep on her raised bed across the hut. In the faint moonlight, I could see her there, motionless. At the foot of my own cot, however, stood a figure. It was short, perhaps 3 feet tall, and hunched. At first I thought a child had somehow wandered in, but then my eyes focused on it, and dread coiled in my stomach. It was no child. The thing was covered in patchy brownish hair, like a mangy baboon. Its limbs were thin and strangely bent. I could make out pointed ears and a grotesquely large head. It had huge, round eyes that reflected a sickly yellow in the dim light. Those eyes were staring straight at me. I tried to yell, but I couldn't make a sound. The creature let out a soft, throaty giggle, a sound far too adult and cruel for its small size. My blood turned to ice. It climbed onto my cot with a quick, jerky motion. I felt the mattress shift under it. Despite its small frame, it was unexpectedly heavy. It scurried up onto my chest, crouching there on all fours. I have never felt weight like that, as if an anvil were pressing me down. Its wiry hair brushed against my chin. I could smell an awful odour, a mix of stagnant water and rot emanating from it. The Tokoloshe, what else could it be, brought its face right up to mine. I could see every detail of its inhuman features, the leathery skin of its face, the tiny sharp teeth poking between its lips, the gleeful malice in those big yellow eyes. My heart thundered so hard I thought it might burst. It opened its mouth in a hideous grin, and a thin, raspy voice spoke in a language I did not understand. The words came out as a harsh whisper, each sibilant sound sending a jolt of fear through me. I have no idea what it said, perhaps a curse, perhaps a taunt. Tears leaked from my eyes as I lay utterly helpless beneath this nightmare imp. Just then, Nokatula began to stir. Perhaps she sensed something even in her sleep. She emitted a low moan, and in doing so, knocked over a metal bowl by her bedside. It clanged loudly on the floor. In an instant, the Tokoloshe whipped its head around toward the noise. It hissed angrily, a sound like an angry cat. In one bound, it leapt off my chest and skittered toward the shadows by the open doorway. I heard a rapid pitter-patter of footsteps, and then it was gone into the night. My body was my own again. I sat up with a cry, gasping for air. Nokatula woke to find me on the cot, sobbing and clutching my chest. I told her between shaking breaths what I had seen. She gave me a sad, knowing nod. She had grown up hearing of the Tokoloshe, but to actually see an outsider fall victim as well. It both validated her fears and horrified her. I left the village with a profound respect for this superstition. No scientific explanation can erase what I experienced with my own eyes. I know there are those who won't believe me, but I also know somewhere out there, in the dark, a sly little demon is snickering, waiting for its next chance to climb onto an unsuspecting sleeper's chest. I believe now, as the villagers do, that the Tokoloshe is very real and very, very dangerous. I've always considered myself rational, but nothing could have prepared me for the Hat Man. Across the world, countless people have reported seeing this same dark figure, a tall, silent shadow wearing a brimmed hat, lurking in their bedrooms at night. I never imagined I would join their ranks. My encounter with the Hat Man remains the most chilling experience of my life. The first time I saw him was a year ago, at about 4 a.m. I had woken up inexplicably and found I couldn't move my body at all. I was lying in bed, eyes darting around in the dim glow of my nightlight. That's when I noticed a silhouette in the far corner of my room, near the closet. It was unmistakably human-shaped and extremely tall. My heart began to pound as I realized someone was standing there. I tried to shout, but I couldn't make a sound. The figure didn't move. As my eyes adjusted, I discerned the outline of a long coat, and on its head a wide-brimmed hat. The stranger's features were impossible to see in the darkness. It was as if he was made of shadow itself. I should have been terrified, but oddly in that moment I felt more confusion than fear. I blinked rapidly, thinking my eyes were playing tricks, but the Hat Man, for that's all my mind could call him, remained watching me. I don't know how long I lay there paralysed and staring. It could have been 30 seconds or 5 minutes. Suddenly, I was able to jerk my arm and let out a cry. In that instant, the corner of the room was empty. I flicked on my lamp, heart hammering. Nothing there. I convinced myself it had been a half-dream, a figment of groggy vision. Weeks passed without incident, and I hoped it was a one-time hallucination. I even joked about it with friends, but deep down I dreaded that dark corner of my room each night. And then the Hat Man came again. This time it was raining outside, a heavy storm around 2 a.m. A flash of lightning must have woken me. I realized I was once more completely paralyzed. Raindrops tapped on the window as I strained to move even a finger, but I couldn't. A familiar dread flooded my chest. I sensed I was not alone. With immense effort, I rolled my eyes toward the foot of my bed. There he was. The Hat Man stood at the end of my bed, much closer than before. He was towering at least 6.5 feet, with that same wide-brimmed hat and trench coat silhouette. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the room in stark white for an instant, and I swear I saw a hint of a face under that hat. 2 reflective eyes, and maybe the glint of teeth in what could have been a smile. I might have imagined it, but I'll never forget that image. I tried to scream, to jolt my limbs. Nothing. He simply stood there, utterly still. Unlike other nightmares I'd had, this figure didn't fade away. He was real, occupying physical space in my room, regarding me quietly as I lay helpless. I pleaded internally for him to go away, reciting prayers in my head, anything. I could hear my own pulse thundering in my ears. The Hat Man tilted his head slightly, as if curious. Then, very slowly, he began to lean forward over the bed. He didn't bend at the waist. Instead, his whole form glided closer, like a tall shadow reaching out. His face neared mine, coming within a foot of me. I could now discern the shape of a human-like head beneath the hat brim, but it was featureless darkness. A pair of faint red glints suggested eyes staring into mine. I've never felt such raw primal fear. It was as if death itself was studying me. Tears rolled down my temples. I wanted to squeeze my eyes shut, but even my eyelids refused to obey. The Hat Man's face hovered over mine for what felt like an eternity. He didn't touch me. He never once laid a finger on me, but the sheer terror of his presence was paralyzing in its own right. I couldn't even sob, though I was crying. I remember thinking, this is how I die, of fear. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. A car alarm abruptly went off on the street outside, a blaring noise that cut through the silence. In that fraction of a second, I gasped and found I could move. I thrashed and screamed, flailing at the apparition. In an instant, he was gone. The weight of his presence lifted. I knew I was alone again. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night, or many nights thereafter. I left every light on, pacing my apartment until dawn. I've since learned that many others have seen the Hat Man during sleep paralysis, and that he usually doesn't physically harm anyone. But knowing he might simply watch me again is somehow just as horrifying. I don't know what the Hat Man really is, a shared hallucination, a demon, or something beyond understanding, but I do know I never want to see that silent, hatted silhouette ever again. Now, each night, I dread that dark corner, fearing that one day I'll open my eyes and find him once more, staring, and waiting in the darkness. For years, I suffered occasional sleep paralysis episodes. I'd wake up unable to move with that crushing feeling and a dark silhouette in the room. Doctors and articles reassured me it was all in my mind, until one night proved that sometimes the terror is all too real. It was a humid night last July. I was living alone in a small ground floor apartment. I went to bed around midnight, double-checking that I'd locked the windows and doors as always. Sometime in the early morning hours, I stirred into consciousness and immediately recognized the familiar dread. I couldn't move. Not again, I thought. My room was dimly lit by the street lamp outside, casting faint shadows on the walls. I tried to calm myself. I'd been through this paralysis before. Usually, I'd see a phantom figure at the foot of my bed and knew it wasn't real. And, indeed, as my eyes scanned the room, I saw a shape standing near the bedroom door. My heart began to pound. It looked like a person, a tall, dark outline. I told myself it was just another hallucination, the same trick of my brain that had haunted me since my teen years. But something about this silhouette was different. It wasn't drifting or vanishing like my usual apparitions. It was solid. And I swear, I heard a very real floorboard creak beneath its weight. The figure was extremely still, seemingly watching me. My rational mind fought with rising panic. Was this an intruder? No, it had to be the shadow man of my nightmares, I insisted internally. Any second now, the paralysis would end, and the figure would evaporate as it always did. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the apparition away. When I opened them, the figure was no longer by the door. For a split second I felt relief. The hallucination must have passed. But then I realized the shadow was closer. It was now positioned at the foot of my bed. I could make out the vague shape of a person, possibly male, with broad shoulders. This was no wispy phantom melting into the darkness. This shape was opaque, blocking the pale light from the window. A cold wave of realization washed over me. Someone was truly in my room. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to defend myself, but I remained frozen in place by the paralysis. I could only follow the intruder with my eyes. He took a slow step along the side of my bed. I caught a glint of something metallic in his hand. Was that a knife? My blood ran cold. He leaned in slightly, perhaps to check if I was asleep. I held my breath, trying not to betray that I was conscious. My mind was racing frantically through options that my body couldn't enact. I felt utterly helpless. As the intruder moved nearer to my head, an unexpected sound shattered the silence. Sirens wailing in the distance, probably an ambulance on the main road. The red flashing light swept intermittently through my curtained window. The intruder's head turned toward the window, distracted. In that terrified moment, I felt a sudden jolt. My limbs loosened from the paralysis. Perhaps the adrenaline spiked enough to break me free. Without hesitating, I lunged upright and let out a scream, a raw guttural cry that I'd been holding in. The figure startled. In 2 strides, he dashed out of my bedroom. I heard the swift patter of footsteps through my living room and the clatter of my front door being thrown open. By the time I stumbled out of bed, shaking uncontrollably, The intruder was gone into the night. Hands trembling, I flicked on every light and called 911. When police arrived, they found my front door lock had been picked. My kitchen window was also pried open, likely his entry point. The phantom I had often dismissed was no phantom that night. He was a very real burglar, or perhaps worse. I was lucky to have awoken when I did. The officer scanned for fingerprints and had me check if anything was stolen. My laptop and wallet were missing. On the floor by my bed, they found something chilling. A footprint left in the faint dust. Not a muddy, demonic hoof print, but the clear tread of a man's boot leading toward where I'd been laying sleeping. I still have sleep paralysis sometimes, but the real horror of that night is knowing that one time it wasn't in my head. Ever since, I struggle to sleep at all. The slightest creak in my apartment and I jolt awake, heart racing. People tell me it was just extraordinarily bad luck, that the odds of it happening again are slim. But as I lie in the dark, I no longer fear imaginary demons. I fear the very real monsters that might be standing in the shadowed corners, watching, waiting for me to become paralyzed once more. So, my dear nightmares, as you know, sleep paralysis is one of the oldest recorded phenomena, and yet we still can't fully explain it. Demons, trauma, or something that doesn't care if we believe in it. One of the stories you just heard was fiction. The rest were real. So, which one was the lie? Leave your guess in the comments below. The first to get it right might find their name whispered in the next video. Until next time, sleep well. And if you can't move tonight, just remember, you're not alone.
Thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.